Dear Consul General of Poland, thank you. Dear guests, welcome back. The Consul General of Ukraine, in his early speech, mentioned about 9-year-old girl whose mother has been killed by a bombshell in the region of Borodyanka. I would like to read the contents of her heartfelt letter to her dead mother. Mom, you are the best mom in the whole world. This letter is a present for you on 8th of March. Thank you for the best 9 years of my life. I am grateful to you for my childhood. I will never forget you. I want you to be happy in heaven. I will do my best to be a good person and to go to heaven too. See you in heaven. Love, Galia. I recently asked a little girl what she thinks of war. And she replied, if we were future and we are dying, there is no future. There is no winner of war. I now would like to welcome our guest speakers in this CIF dialogue to talk about the effect of war on the community psychology. Please welcome to our moderator, a prominent journalist, Atasagun, and our distinguished speakers, İnci Haseki, UNICEF Turkish National Committee Director, Murat Germen, a renowned Turkish artist and academician, Pelin Batu, a well-known writer and actress, and Gizem Konus, Clinical Director of Maya Foundation.
Thank you. Yes. The Honorable Consul Generals of Ukraine, Poland, Azerbaijan, Germany, and United Kingdom, and distinguished guests, welcome, a warm welcome to you all today. Welcome to the CIF panel on the effects of war. The title is a broad one, actually. Wars have multiple effects. We are here to look at wars from a perspective, from a humanitarian perspective. Before we start, I'd like to ask to each person in this room to take a deep breath, a very deep one indeed, and to be grateful for what we have, for what each of us in this room has. We're in good health. We should be thankful for our lives, to be alive, to be surrounded by our beloved ones, no matter what the challenges are, challenges we're facing daily, because we are amongst the fortunate ones in a world where the number of conflict and the number of war is rising. We are gathered here today for a meaningful and humanitarian cause to touch the lives of the less fortunate ones, those affected by war. No one wants to be a refugee. No one wants to leave their homes, their lives, their beloved ones, and their dreams, and just walk away to an unknown future. But to survive, they are forced to flee their countries, their homes, their dreams, and their beloved ones, leaving their beloved ones behind. Today, more than 84 million people have been forcibly displaced worldwide, and among them, more than 26.6 million are refugees. Children are the most affected ones from wars. Since the last 20 years, the number of children living in conflict has increased. Today, more than 450 million child, or 1 in 6, live in conflict zone. And at present time, with each day passing, the numbers are getting higher and higher. So I would like to now give the floor to our first panelist, who is the Executive Director of UNICEF Turkish National Committee, Ms. İnci Haseki. The worst place to be for a child is conflict and war. So we will start with UNICEF. Perhaps we could start from the situation of children in war and conflict zones. As there are 20 conflict zones around the world today, people are affected by war with no access even to their basic needs, basic humanitarian needs. We could talk maybe about what the impacts of the war on survivors are, and especially on children.
Thank you very much. I will start with the situation in Ukraine. We are 2 months into the war, and the humanitarian conditions for the children in Ukraine is becoming increasingly dire. And until now, already 2/3 of the children in Ukraine have been displaced in such a short period of time. And children are being killed, they are being injured, they are traumatized. Those who are living, they are terrified, they are in shock. And what they need is actually, they are desperate for safety, security, and protection. Not only for the Ukrainian children, but all the children under war conditions and those who are being displaced. There are several effects of that. The first one is the family situation, because during war, most of the families lose their employment, so they do not have any income to be able to sustain their children, to support even the basic needs for children, starting with nutrition. This is the first thing. The second thing is for children who are displaced. Actually, there are multiple risks for those children. I will start with the first one, which is the risk of getting separated from their family. So you can see a lot of unaccompanied children who are being displaced. And in Ukraine, it is not only the children who are going outside of within Ukraine, these children are being displaced, so they are losing their homes. And displacement is one of the worst child protection crises, especially for children who have disabilities and who are not accompanied by an adult, by a family member. The next one is the situation of sanitation and hygiene, because war situation does not render the luxury of sanitation and hygiene. So the diseases increase, vaccination rates drop, and especially during the times of COVID, this is even more dangerous for children and their families. And the next one is, of course, education. War raises an education crisis for children. Even if their humanitarian needs are met, they cannot get a quality education. So these are all the effects of war and displacement. And children under war, they face similar problems. Ukraine, Yemen, Syria, Ethiopia, all these children are under similar conditions actually. And maybe I can talk a little bit about what UNICEF is doing for these children in Ukraine.
Yes, if we talk about
Sure.
with the recent war in Ukraine, we have witnessed once again that the children are the most affected ones, as you just said and expressed. The war is having a devastating impact on the country's 7.5 million children, and more than 215 children sadly lost their lives, and more than 390 were wounded. And they are deeply traumatized by the violence around them. What would you say on the specific case of the children in Ukraine today and the risks they are facing during the war?
Yeah. As I've mentioned, there is a huge number of displacement. So there is the risk of separation, abuse, violence, trafficking. These are all the risks these facing. So UNICEF, of course, is trying to help all these children, starting with the basic needs, like, for example, blankets, winter clothing for the children, life-saving supplies, areas, child-friendly areas where the children are getting psychological first aid and also pediatric care. Also supporting the all Ukrainian school platform so that children can continue their education as much as possible, and for their health, giving psychosocial support and surgical and first aid kits for the children.
Yes. Especially on the refugee children, what is UNICEF exactly doing, and if you could tell us a little bit on this,
Yes.
especially on the situation in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Ukrainian
Actually, for the Ukrainian children, when they are moving outside of the country, UNICEF has established several places which we call Blue Dot centers, and Blue Dot centers are places where the children come either with their families or unaccompanied. And here, first of all, they are registered so that there is a possibility of reuniting with their families if they are coming through that road as well. They are receiving, it's like a safe place for them, like a safe zone for them where they can play, where they are getting psychological help, because all of these children are traumatized by the war, and also usually they are with their mothers, so the mothers are getting help as well, and of course there is they are provided with the most basic needs. So these blue dots, they are established in Poland, in Moldavia, in Romania, in Hungary, all the neighboring countries where these children are firstly fleeing to.
And what is needed most? What does UNICEF, for instance, what are the demands? Like, is it the basic demands, such as the humanitarian needs, or especially on the case of Ukraine?
Yes, for the Ukrainian children, actually, it is always the basic needs, because they have just left their countries without having anything with themselves. So it starts with the basic needs. So that's why it is important that these children are provided to both within Ukraine, because they are displaced, so they are away from their homes, and also outside of Ukraine. So the basic needs are very important for them. That's why there has been a humanitarian appeal, a large one for $900 million for all the Ukrainian emergency, and 600 million of this is actually for the children within Ukraine, and the rest is for the countries neighboring Ukraine.
Lastly, perhaps because we're running out of time, we shouldn't. We have 2 more minutes.
Okay.
If I didn't count it wrong, So, last we could perhaps talk on the Art for Peace, Make Art for Peace project, and this collaboration with UNICEF. What would you say on this?
Actually, we are happy that Art for Peace has come into life, because art is the form which is helping, in the best way for traumatized people, and this is a way of helping children as well. But I would like to conclude with one thing. Actually, children are children. They need love, they need protection, they need education, but above all, they need peace.
Yes. İnce Hasteki, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
The human history is full of wars, and war has never been far from human society. I have checked the Wikipedia. It says that there have been 10,624 battles in the history of mankind. If we look at the ancient times, the suffering of wars was a way of life, and its expressions were thought to be determined by the action of a host of patron deities. For instance, the Greeks distinguished between the art of war as influenced by goddess Athena and the primal bloodlust craved by the war god Ares. Pelin Batu will tell us more about this. She's an acclaimed author, historian, and actress. Today's understanding of war differs from the antique civilizations' time, but they all
Not really.
carry...
Not really, I
Not
think.
really.
No, just
Okay.
as bloodthirsty and
Blood,
greedy.
yes. So, but they all have also the mutual fears they carried. So what would you say on the ancient wars and the goddess of wars and the mythology when you go back there? If you compare to the present time wars, what are your contemplations on that?
Thank you so much. We'd spoken briefly on the phone, but I didn't know you were going to make this reference, which is exactly where I'm going to start from.
Thank you.
I've been teaching mythology and history and literature for a while, and I always underline the fact that actually not much has changed. That's why, you know, the names of the gods might change, their roles may change, but the fact that the banality of evil, as Hannah Arendt, who's one of my favorite philosophers, says, the banality of evil has not changed. That being said, obviously, when you look at the pantheons of ancient people, you see that almost every civilization has a war god. I actually made a list because before coming here, I didn't know how many gods and goddesses specific civilizations had. Just one little parenthesis here. The more difficult a geography, the more harsh the climactic situations, the uglier and fiercer their gods are. So when you look at Mesopotamia, for instance, you get about 14 war gods and goddesses. The Greeks, the Greco-Romans excelled in that. They have 28 different kinds of war deities. But obviously these are very specific. Some of them are, you know, victory goddesses or gods. Some of them are very specific in that they personify the war battle cry, etc. As you said, there a few very big gods and goddesses for war, and the distinctions are important there, which I'm going to get to. Balkans, which is where I'm from, we're very known for warlike ways too, so they have many war gods. The Philippines, interestingly, they have 15 different war gods. What else? The Chinese have 14. So the list goes on. Every nation has a war god or goddess. But I'm going to, since we have a very limited amount of time, I'm going to compare and contrast Ares and Athena, because I think the distinction there is very telling as to the sociology of the different nations. So as most of you probably know, Ares was the god of war, and you know we know his name because he's one of the 12 noteworthy Olympians. He's the son of Hera and Zeus, who are not known to be a very peaceful couple. You know, they constantly fought and were constantly jealous of each other. So, you know, ergo, their son Ares was one of the Olympians. But interestingly, in the Greco-Roman world, Ares was a very insignificant god. I mean, he was always in the background. He hardly had any temples around. We have one or two in the Anatolian mainland, in the coastal regions, but mostly he was revered by the Spartans, who were known to be a very warlike people. The Ares temple in Sparta was decked with lions and stuff, were known to be fierce animals and angry mammals, the angriest mammals actually. And interestingly, the Egyptian war god Bastet is a cat. Later on, they basically shifted her role to a lioness and made that war god fiercer than the cat one. But anyway, so Ares, as I said, was quite an insignificant god, and he was basically seen as a necessary evil. But he was renowned for being bloodthirsty and enjoying war. And interestingly, to tie in this question of children and subject there, he went to war with a chariot filled with his own children. Now, his children are interesting because he has a great number of children and a great number of affairs with goddesses like Aphrodite. But his children were, Deimos, for instance. These minor gods and goddesses personified fear, terror, things that are associated with war. So he basically lunged around all these children with him to the center of war and wreaked more havoc when he went there. But one of his children, for instance, is Harmony, which I think is interesting because along with war, there is this pale little goddess in the background hanging out there till it ends. And when it's all over, she basically lurks into the foreground from her background and seems to bring about peace. Now, as I said, Ares, when you look at him, he's out there, he's one of the Olympians, but he always loses. As we know, there's no winning side in war. And, he's hardly mentioned in any of the major literatures. You see him in Homer. You see him make an appearance in the Trojan War, but he wins. He picks the wrong side, our side that is, the Trojan side, and he's impaled by Athena during the war. And Homer describes it in such a vivid way. He screams so much when he's impaled by Athena that the scream basically stops the war for a short while. That being said, as I said, he hardly makes an appearance, whereas all the other deities during the war, in the Iliad and also in Odysseus's adventures, you see Athena, you see Poseidon, you see Zeus, you see Hera, you see all these other gods, but Ares is hardly even significant. Now, I'm going to contrast him with Athena, because Athena was, as you know, the main god of the Athenians, and she is personified by the olive tree because she gifted that to the Athenians. That was the preferred gift. And as you know, that's the symbol of peace in many countries around the world, especially the Mediterranean basin. Athena is different from Ares because she was a diplomat, she was a strategist, and she preferred to solve things in a peaceable manner until it wasn't possible. So, yes, of course, she was a war goddess too. She wore a helmet, but she was born out of Zeus's skull, his brain. So she basically symbolizes a kind of warlikeness that can be solved with talk, with diplomacy. And throughout the Greco-Roman world, she was basically favored to Ares more so than any other goddess. And in the pantheon, there is a classification. Like for the Greeks, Zeus was the main god, but Athena was seen as the second goddess, not Hera. She was seen as the most important goddess next to Zeus. So father and daughter basically ruled over the Greco-Roman realms. When the Romans basically copied everything from the Greeks, just changing their names, they obviously took over the pantheon. So Mars became the war god for the Romans. But Romans, being very practical and very in terms of war, seeing war as a practical thing, when they did go to war, they used Mars as a great symbol of power and physicality, because physicality was important for them too. It was a very male-oriented culture. But then, interestingly, they didn't take the attributes of Ares. They took on the attributes of Athena. So Mars became the symbol of more intermediary god, and war was seen as a necessary evil for the Romans. War was necessary for them to maintain peace. So this is how the Greco-Roman system works. But I know I have a limited time and I can't go into detail about their doings and their famous affairs.
No, it's amazing to hear you, and you're telling the story beautifully. So.
Thank you. But I'm going to tie this in with art because when I was thinking about ancient mythology and all these people like Joseph Campbell and Fraser, who talk about megamyths and how gods have a million faces because they're similar everywhere. Gods are created because of our fear. We know that from the mythologies of the world. And our fears are our mirrors, actually. What we fear, we manifest. So when we read these ancient mythologies, we see our own very fears. So that's why in the beginning I said that it's not much different from today. Our psyches, our psychologies have not changed. We're still doing the same horrid things. Even today, I was talking to someone, I think the Consul General, right before this, witnessing something and not being able to do something about it. I mean, we're in the 21st century. It puts in us a great sense of guilt, I think. Because to watch a war as if it's a video game or a film it's not only tragic, it's like really hurtful to our psyches. These people who were living in war, in Rome, the average age of a child, they lived until about 10 years old. If they were lucky enough, they got married around 13, and many died around 20. So imagine the difference now. But today, we're talking about children dying when they're 3 months old. We're witnessing wars in the Middle East, in Africa, in South America, and we're actually watching it online.
With digitalization.
Which
more
is,
than
I
ever
think,
in our
horrendous
lives, yes.
because we know, and yet we can't change the consequences. So when we read these stories, to me, they're as alive as today, because I don't think anything has changed. And I think if we go back in and travel in a loophole of art history, I want to cite one example, which I think is very significant. I want to talk about the rape of the Sabine women. I don't know if you know this painting. Poussin painted it. Jacques David painted it. Who else? I actually made a list of all the famous painters Degas, Picasso, Jacques Stella. So the rape of the Sabine women is a very, very famous subject. And it was first written by the Roman historian Livy. And Livy basically describes what happened, which I don't know if I have time. How much? No?
We ran out of our time, so but I give you 1 more minute.
Okay, I'm just going to wrap it up really quickly.
So sorry.
The story is about the foundation of Rome, right when Rome was founded by Romulus. It was filled by a pack of bandits, basically, and they thought that if we don't find women, we're going to die after 1 generation. So they basically went around the neighboring towns asking for people to get married to them, but no one wanted to marry a band of bandits, obviously. So what they did was, during this famous festival of Neptune, they raped, or they basically took women in order to impregnate them, and that was how basically Rome was founded. Great foundation story, not the wolf, but this one. So later on, it was the women who all these wars started because everyone started saying, Rome, you're a horrible state. You basically raped children and women, and you can't do this. So these ongoing wars went on and on and on and on. Eventually, the women that were abducted or raped intervened, and they said that we don't want our husbands and our fathers to fight, and that is how the war ended. Now, it's interesting, my last statement here, that in art history, if you Google these paintings by all these famous painters, you'll see that it's represented as a great symbol of the import of families, because the great Romans, the Greco-Romans that are the foundation of Western art and history, that is what they claim, are basically trying to found families. So it's like art history reverses the actual story of a horrible abduction and rape, which I think is interesting because this is not the story of a great family. It's the story of, the inequality and horrendousness of war.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm sure you will be having some questions during the session, Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we're going to give the floor to Ms. Gizem Konus, the director of Maya Foundation, and she's a clinical psychologist. The Maya Foundation works to improve the quality of life for children and youth, the ones who have suffered from trauma due to natural disasters, migration, family loss, pandemics, and help them reach their potential. So my first question will be on the situation of refugee children to you, because as Maya Foundation has started its work in 2011 with the break of war in Syria and with Syrian refugee children, and you have started the psychosocial support with the break of the war in Syria. Could you tell us a little bit about what Maya Foundation is doing for these children
Thank you.
who
And
have suffered and who have survived wars and conflicts?
And firstly, I want to thank you, Inci and Pelin, for their inputs. And as a clinical psychologist, I will mention about more in a clinical perspective, for a different perspective. So yes, we start our programs, our MHPSS, it means mental health and psychosocial support in INGO area. We started our programs, unfortunately, with the war, with Syrian crisis. And unfortunately, again, just the name, just the country name differs. And again, millions of children, millions of caregivers, millions of families are exposed to trauma. And the trauma has really long-lasting and dramatic effects in children's lives. We can't see them immediately, but the trauma's effects is really long-lasting, and we should take some precautions against them. Why? Because when it comes to trauma, it's always considered as most of the time it's considered as a major life event, such as war, loss, grief, abuse. Yes, this is true, but one missing point, even not being seen and not being heard and not being there as a child is also a traumatic event.
The war is the biggest trauma.
Biggest trauma,
yes.
but it's a well-known description of trauma. But with that, not just being seen and not being heard as a child is also trauma. And yes, the war is unfortunately ongoing, but displaced children and displaced families are not seen. They are ignored most of the time, but not by us, but the universe. So we have some precautions against this. So our mental health and psychosocial support are aiming their well-being and preventing some more pathologic, more clinical effects of trauma. For example, when we experience a major trauma, our learning set stops in our mind, and our expressive side of the brain locks itself. So our aim is to do something to prevent this. So following this question, we will mention about more art and art therapy techniques, because what Maya Vakfı Foundation do, which differs from the other NGOs and INGOs that are supporting children and again families, Maya Vakfı supports all these groups with the art therapy based techniques, with psychological support mechanisms, because art is a way of expression, I mentioned before, which is locked with the trauma, because it's a it's a process actually from passivity to activeness, because sometimes as a human, after a traumatic event, if our need is to refuse to let back the traumatic event, we had to recreate the traumatic event again by doing something different. You have to sculpt, you have to draw, you have to sing, you have to dance, or whatever. But as an art technique, it's a way of express ourselves. So we try to open these potentials. They are sleeping because afterwards, after traumatic stress.
And very often at Maya Foundation, you're emphasizing this concept of trauma-informed.
Trauma-informed.
Could you tell us a little bit about it?
Trauma-informed.
I believe it's a special technique, method you have developed.
And more openly, when you Google trauma-informed or you want to mean trauma-informed in Google, most of the time you see trauma-sensitive or trauma-free. But it's not missing. It's not the truth because trauma-free is actually false. Because on the contrary, we want to emphasize, we want to highlight trauma, the awareness of trauma, the being of trauma. Trauma is there. We shouldn't ignore it. So trauma-free is not the right phrase for this. And also trauma-sensitive again is not. Why? Because sensitive means fragile, you know. But being trauma-informed all contains the meaning we want to express about being trauma-sensitive or trauma-free. Being trauma-informed means being alert the symptoms of trauma in a child or in a caregiver or whoever. Being alert the small baby steps of some symptoms. For example, most of the time when children behave more aggressively, it's easy to classify it as a pathology in a clinical way. But no, the children has no pathology actually. It just saw the small baby steps of some traumatic symptoms. So most of the children cannot express themselves when they have a traumatic event in family setting or a social setting. But sometimes, on the contrary, some children or some caregiver or father or mother, they express more aggressively, on the contrary. So it's crucial to be alert that I should do something, there is something wrong with that human being. So trauma-informed is a really important term, I think. It's not an individual concept we want to arise. It's an, I think, also institutional word. For example, as Maya Vakfı Foundation, we are trying to create trauma-informed schools, trauma-informed institutions. For example, in a school climate, in a school environment, it's really important for a teacher, for a psychological counselor to recognize a child. I can feel something, there is something wrong in this child's wrong in their family environment, in their family setting. So it's important at that point refer this child to a psychological counselor or a clinical psychologist or whatever.
And we have a little bit left, 2 minutes. So if you could tell us a little bit on your recent project for the Ukrainian children and the psychosocial support you will be giving now.
In all mental health and psychosocial support programs, as all you know, the first step is really important and it's most of the time need assessment process, psychological needs. We can scan an executive summary of what they need. So for the first step, as Maya Vakfı Foundation, we firstly we will get together with the women. Our aim is to firstly see their needs. Firstly as a human, and then as a woman, and thirdly as a mother, what they need. Because our purpose is, in the following step, to become together with the children with art-based therapy techniques for a mental health support, because all art-based therapy techniques, all mental health support, including art-based therapy techniques, actually is a process of healing and self-actualization after such kind of unfortunate traumatic events.
Gizem Konus, thank you very much.
I think.
And now we pass on to our last panelist, Mr. Murat Germen, internationally acclaimed artist, academic. He teaches art at Sabancı University. He teaches photography and new media at Sabancı University and is an archivist also. Mr. Germen, you as an artist have a special focus on the impacts of over-urbanization and gentrification, civic rights, participatory citizenship, sustainability of local cultures, human devastation of nature, climate change. You focus a lot on climate change, global warming and water rights. And please remind me if I have missed anything. I'm sure.
No, it's all very complete. Yeah.
So here we would like to talk a little bit, see what from the art, what war is and the concept of war from the artist perspective a little bit. If we could start by this. And then
Sure.
continue.
Actually, I have something written, so maybe
Yes.
I can go following
Thank you.
some thoughts that I have. First of all, I must say that I'm really honored and proud to be part of this event, and my heart and mind are with Ukrainian civilians, especially children, of course, which suffered the most out of this, I guess. Art itself actually is a struggle, war in a way, with systemic violence of any kind. Many artists produced significant works against war, warmongers, weapon traders, combat, imperialism, colonialism, massacre, carnage, cruelty, oppression, racism. These are all terms related to the same, I mean, the central concept of war. And I think art is one of the very few channels through which people can create oppositional content, because we are somehow immune in a particular sense. People let us protest things, or
Because the artist, sorry to interrupt, has the mission usually to bring up what's not spoken. And what's not
exactly.
said.
We
And
are
it's an-
always situated on the margin, and we need to stay there. And some people treat us like the mad guy of the village or something, and they let us do things. So
Perhaps without knowing that you're having an internal war. The artist is having an internal war with himself.
Exactly,
or
it's a
herself.
different type of creation in the sense that in design, for instance, you have a client, you have a brief, and you have a particular need to solve, and then you bring a solution as a design professional. But in our case, there's no demand, so we just start by creating by ourselves, following our own, personal inclinations and interests. I was going to say that, it's one of the few channels, and there's a lot of censorship, obviously, of various kinds, and we still continue to produce what we need to produce. And on the other hand, there's this paradoxical use of the word art, as can be seen in the phrase "the art of war." Departing from this, I think we can also talk about the concept of art of the war art. So that there are direct and indirect ways of opposing war in artistic practice, and since there is an inflation in the use of military symbols recently, I chose to approach the topic indirectly. I'm going to refer briefly to the work I gave here.
Yes, please.
The title of the work is Ode to Hair. Hair is one body component that is in the center of various debates. Its absence is one nuisance, presence is another. Several discourses on humankind's social status depend on it. In the light of the fact that how absurdly far these biased discourses can go, all body components should contribute to our liberation. Humans should be able to steer anywhere, just like hair flying in the wind. While vital organs like brain and heart vanish after death, hair, as one of the few surviving remains, deserve an ode. And maybe, I mean, if you can let me to talk more about the war itself right now.
Yes, because I know that you interpret the wars going on today as the Third World War.
Exactly.
We could talk a little bit about this and
Thanks
tell us why.
for
Yes.
reminding. Yeah, I think we are already suffering the Third World War. It is just in a different format than the two previous ones. It is not a single monolithic war that spans a certain period of time, like 3 to 5 years or more or less. It is rather a collection of small wars that are created here and there, every now and then, yet continuous, never ending. This is a better format for the ones who benefit from wars, since it never ends. The so-called developed countries continue to develop technologies for various types of ruthless killing machines, the weapons. These countries invest, unfortunately, more lately on war industries than education, medicine, hunger, and especially climate. The weapons created have to be deployed and tested somewhere, obviously outside the territories of producing countries. And this is why wars between ethnicities, folks, tribes, nations, geographies, religions are preconceived and applied frequently. This is like the consumerism of wild capitalism, which produces commodities that are not needed originally, and subsequently creates need and customers for them, using various manipulation and sowing discord strategies and tactics. So we don't actually need these wars. They are created to be able to sell what you already produced. Yes. So this is not the old world of demand first and then supply later. This is the world of we create a surplus of demand. Surplus of supply, and then you create a demand for it, so that we can make these guys all rich. And I am actually quite proud of being the grandnephew of the great Turkish poet Nazım Hikmet. Yes. My grandma was his
the poet of
sister.
hope.
Yeah, exactly. And he has this really great short poem that I would like to quote. The title is "That is the Question." All the wealth of the earth cannot quench their thirst. They want to make a lot of money. They have to kill, you have to die, for them to make a lot of money. I'm not a good poem reader, by the way, so excuse my reading. No doubt they don't admit it openly. They hang up colorful lanterns on the dry branches. They send running on the roads glittering lies, their tails all covered with tinsel and spangles. In the marketplace, they are beating the drums. Under the tents, the tiger man, the mermaid, the headless man, the acrobats in pink shorts on the straight wire, all have heavily made up faces. To be duped or not to be duped, that is the question. If you are not duped, you will live. If you are duped, you will not. I think it's a great poem about war.
Great verses by Nazım Hikmet.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Murat Germen.
My pleasure.
And thank you all for participating. Now we will take questions from our audience. If we have any questions to our participants and panelists, we like to hear them. Okay, then I will finalize this panel on the effects of war. Yes. Please.
Well, let me say thank you for everything you have done and doing for helping Ukraine and other countries that are in need. And my question is to Lady in Blue. Thank you so much for this interesting story about myths and gods and goddess. And you told a story about how Roman nation starts. Please let me ask if I understand it correct. Nobody want to be a wife of Roman, and they took women by force, and they delivered children, and they war started. And after that, women told, we don't want our fathers and husbands fight. Is it correct?
Yes, you understood perfectly. The Sabine women. The Romans, after they founded Rome, according to the myth of Romus and Romulus, you know, that was basically bred by a she-wolf, they needed to populate the city. So they went to all the neighboring countryside to basically ask for the women for their hand in marriage. But as I said, no one wanted to marry the Romans because they were mostly, you know, these robbers and thieves that collected in the city, and mostly men around Romulus.
Okay.
So since no one wanted to marry them, they took them by force.
And right now, I don't know if I told, I'm from Ukraine, I'm from Kiev, and I know that terrible stories about rapes that Russian soldiers made with our women. And some of these women are pregnant right now. It's horrible, it's terrible, and it's hurt me a lot. And I just have your story in one side and our story in other side, and I'm asking you, why did you pick this particular story about raping and making nation? I hope you didn't want to tell that Russians who just right now raping our women are going to make new huge nation.
I'd like to interfere here and say that we all condemn the use of rape, sexual abuse, sexual violence as an arm during conflicts and wars. We're all against this as humans because the perpetrators are never being punished and they are not even found anywhere. And
thank you for asking this question and clarifying my choice of a story. I especially picked this because unfortunately throughout history this violence has never ended. The biggest praise of war are always women and children at first. And it's always women throughout history that try to intervene, to try to stop war, to try to reason, to try to say stop war. But they are usually the first victims, and they are used in order to basically seek revenge. As I said, I'm from the Balkans, for instance, and during the 90s, when about 1 million or so women were raped in Bosnia, I was, you know, in my 13 or 14 years old, reading Zlata's diary, which is really akin to Diary of Anne Frank. And and then I studied history in university, and it made me want to, excuse my language, want to throw up constantly because you see the same story in every different geography repeated over and over and over again. That's why I especially use that story, because I think that that's what's being done today too. You know it better than I am. I do.
Yes. Any more questions from our audience? Well, we're finalizing this panel. I'd like to thank Pelin Batu, İnci Haseki, Gizem Konus, and Murat Germen, our participants, our panelists, for their time and for their precious thoughts here and the speech. I'd like to thank again the Honorable Consul Generals of Ukraine, Poland, Germany, United Kingdom, and Azerbaijan, and the distinguished guests for being present here. We were gathered for a great cause, and we hope the peace comes soon. Let me finish with some verses from Nazım Hikmet, the grand-uncle of
yes.
Mr. Murat Germen. I have some of the verses here. I'm not good in memory, but let me read in English. Let's give the world to the children just for one day, like a balloon in bright and striking colors to play with. Let them play singing among the stars. Let's give the world to the children like a huge apple, like a warm loaf of bread. At least for one day, let them have enough. Let's give the world to the children, at least for one day. Let the world learn friendship. Children will get the world from our hands, and they'll plant immortal trees. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you. Thanks. Lastly, I also congratulate Mr. Ali Güreli, Rabia Güreli, the Contemporary Istanbul Foundation, the leading international art platform in Turkey, for this collaboration with the artists from Istanbul Artist Residency and UNICEF. A special thanks and congratulations, and to Mehtap Payne and to dear Polina Somochina for this collaboration. Thank you very much. Perhaps you would have the floor just for a few words.
Actually, I would like to thank a couple of people as well, but not to miss them, I will read them very quickly. So we express our special gratitude to Honorable Consul Generals of Ukraine, Poland, and Azerbaijan, and esteemed representatives of the diplomatic missions, Contemporary Istanbul Foundation, Ms. Polina Samochkina, Istanbul Artist Residency, and dear Mehtap Hanım, the sponsors, the artists who are donating their valuable works of art, and of course our donors. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, dear panelist guests. Thank you, Aslıgu. We will now have another short break, and we'll give the floor to our renowned musicians from Bilkent Symphony Orchestra, Rustam Rahmedov and Yevgeny Kostratiski. Please help yourself with the buffets and refreshments, which is located outside, and we will be back in 15 minutes. In the meanwhile, if any of you are interested in our artwork, Polina is going to be available to give you information. Thank you.